The first insult had not come from a stranger. It had come from her husband's family, the very people who should have embraced her after she buried him. "You've given him nothing," her sister-in-law sneered on the day after the funeral, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Not a son, not even a daughter. You drained our food, our coin, and left nothing in return. A barren womb is a cursed womb." Those words settled like stones inside her chest, heavier than the fresh mound of earth marking her husband's grave. She could not speak back. Her tongue seemed tied by grief, by the memory of long nights spent praying for a child who never came, by the unspoken shame she carried for years. She had begged God for a baby, fasted until her body trembled, and yet no life had stirred in her belly. Now her body itself was branded as failure. Her husband had been kind, at least kinder than the rest. He never mocked her in front of others, though she saw the disappointment in his eyes each season that passed with her womb empty. His death, sudden and cruel, had left her untethered. She expected mourning, perhaps pity, from his family. Instead, they saw opportunity. A widow without children was not a blessing but a burden, and burdens were cast away. They whispered of selling her within days. Not selling like livestock, though it felt the same. She would be transferred to another household, perhaps to a man who could not find a wife, perhaps to a trader who wanted a servant. The coin exchanged for her body would fatten their purses, and she would vanish from their sight like a stain washed clean. The night before they led her to market, she sat alone in the corner of the cold room that had once been hers. The quilt her husband's mother had given her lay crumpled in a heap. She dared not touch it. Her hands trembled too badly. Every breath she drew was laced with the fear of what awaited her. Would they sneer at her in public? Would they shout her barrenness aloud for every man, woman, and child to hear? She imagined their jeering faces, their pointed fingers, their laughter cutting sharper than knives. Worse still, she imagined being dragged to a stranger's bed, where her empty womb would once again betray her, and the cycle of shame would begin a new dot when morning came. They dressed her in plain garments, ones that showed no wealth, no finery, no trace of dignity. They stripped her of jewelry, of tokens her husband once gave her, as if to erase his memory from her skin. Her hair, once brushed smooth by her own hands with care, hung in tangles down her back. They did not bother to help her with it. Why polish what was meant for sale at a bargain? The road to the market stretched long and dusty. Her wrists were not bound, but she felt bound all the same. Each step was not her own, it was forced, dictated by the hands that guided her like cattle. When the settlement's wooden platform came into view, her stomach lurched. She had seen it before. A raised stand where men shouted, bargained, spat, and laughed as if they were at sport. Animals had been sold there, along with stolen trinkets and the labor of men who owed debts they could not pay. She never imagined her own feet would climb those splintered boards, and yet, climb she did. The crowd gathered quickly, buzzing like flies around carrion. She heard their voices before she saw their faces. "Too thin," one man said. "She's not young," muttered another. "And barren, they say," shouted a third, loud enough for laughter to ripple outward. Her cheeks burned hot, but her body felt cold. She folded her hands in front of her, as though in prayer, but no words came. Her lips moved silently, perhaps calling for God, perhaps calling for her mother long gone, perhaps only mouthing the word why. The trader who stood beside her called out her worth. His voice was cheerful, mocking, as though even he knew she was worth less than the animals sold before her. A widow, strong enough for housework. Hands to cook, to clean, to mend. Don't be shy, gentlemen. A fair price for a fair worker. But no man raised his hand. Some smirked, others spat, and a few turned away. One jeered, "What's a woman worth who can't give children? You'll feed her for nothing in return." Each word struck like a lash, confirming what her husband's family had said, that she was cursed, a burden, a mistake that should have never been born. Her eyes blurred, though she forced herself not to cry. Tears, she knew, would only bring more laughter. She stood rigid, a statue carved out of shame, waiting for the crowd to disperse, for her body to be dragged away unsold. But fate, cruel and strange, was already at work. In the corner of the crowd, a man stood apart from the others. His skin bore the sun's bronze, his black hair tied back, his presence quiet but heavy. He was Apache, a fact that drew mutters from the white settlers around him. Unlike the others, he did not laugh, did not sneer, did not spit. His eyes rested on her, steady and unreadable, and though she did not yet know it, that gaze would change everything. The trader's voice rang out again, desperate now. A widow with strong arms, good for house or field. Who will take her? A fair bargain, gentlemen. Still, the crowd shuffled, unimpressed. Some men smirked openly, others whispered behind their hands. The word barren hung in the air like smoke, choking her. No matter what skill she possessed, how well she could sew, cook, tend animals, or keep a home, none of it mattered. She was a woman without the one thing they deemed valuable, the promise of children. Her chest tightened as the trader barked again, "Who will give coin for her?" "Do I hear $1? 50 cents?" Laughter answered. "She's not worth feed for a chicken," someone shouted. "You'll pay a man to take her before day's end," another added. Her ears roared with humiliation, every mocking word drilling into her skull. She wanted the earth to open beneath the wooden boards, to swallow her whole, to save her from their sneers. But the platform stood high and exposed, and she could not run. If she leapt down, where would she go? Back to her husband's family, who had already sold her like a mule. Into the wilderness where starvation or worse would find her. So she stood still, her hands folded tightly, nails digging into her palms until tiny crescents of pain reminded her she was alive. The crowd began to thin, some losing interest, others moving on to stalls with fresher produce, sharper knives, sturdier boots. Her shame seemed complete, unsold, unwanted, left to rot like spoiled bread. Even the trader shifted uncomfortably beside her, tugging at his hat, muttering under his breath about bad luck stock. And then the hush came. It was subtle at first, a ripple through the crowd, the way water shifts when a stone is thrown into it. Heads turned, whispers spread, and eyes slid toward the edge of the gathering. She followed their gaze, her heart thudding with dread. An Apache warrior stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, his skin bronzed by the sun, his dark hair bound neatly back. His clothes were plain but well kept, a leather belt at his waist, moccasins on his feet, a knife sheathed at his side. He carried no gun, yet the crowd parted slightly around him as if he did. His presence alone commanded space, respect, or perhaps fear. Whispers turned to mutters. "What's he doing here?" "Savage got no business at a white man's market. Keep your coin, Apache." "She ain't yours to claim," but the man did not answer them. He simply walked forward, his steps measured, steady, as though no insult could reach him. His eyes, dark and unreadable, lifted toward the platform and rested on her. Her breath caught. He did not glance away, did not study her with mocking disdain like the others. His gaze was calm, steady, as if he were weighing something far greater than her barren womb or the trader's desperate call. She felt the weight of it press against her chest, not cruelly, but firmly, like a hand anchoring her in place. The trader blinked, surprised, then stammered, well then. "You looking to buy?" The Apache said nothing at first. He reached into a leather pouch at his side and drew out silver coins. With deliberate calm, he placed them in the trader's palm. No haggling, no argument, no hesitation. The trader's eyes widened. It was more than he expected. Far more. Enough to silence his doubts. He nodded quickly, closing his fist around the money, his tone suddenly cheerful. "She's yours, then?" "Take her. Take her." A hush fell over the crowd. Her knees trembled. "Yours." The word echoed in her ears. Did this mean she would be dragged away, forced into his lodge, made to serve in ways she could not refuse? Fear rose hot in her throat, yet tangled with something else, a flicker of bewilderment, of fragile hope. He had not laughed at her, not once. He had not asked for a discount, nor ridiculed her worth. He had simply chosen. The Apache stepped forward, climbing the platform with the grace of a hunter. Up close, she could see the details the distance had hidden, the calm strength in his jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the quiet power in the way he carried himself. He stopped before her and extended his hand. Her breath faltered. It was not a command, not a grip to seize her, not a shove to drag her down the steps. Simply an open palm, steady and patient, as though he were waiting for her to decide. The crowd murmured, restless. She won't go with him. She's got no choice. She'd rather starve than live with a savage. But their voices blurred, faded, drowned beneath the pounding of her heart. She looked at his hand, strong, weathered, calloused, but offered without force. For the first time since her husband's death, since the cruel words of his family, since the jeers of the crowd, she felt something she thought was lost forever. Dignity. Her fingers, trembling, slowly lifted. She placed her hand in his. The Apache closed as gently around hers, not too tight, not painful, just enough to steady her shaking. Together, they stepped down from the platform. And as the crowd parted, muttering and whispering, she realized something impossible had happened. She was not walking into captivity. She was walking into the unknown. The road out of the market was rough with stones and dust, but she hardly felt it beneath her feet. Her hand remained in his, steady and unyielding, and that strange sense of dignity, so fragile, so new, clung to her like a cloak she dared not shrug off. Behind them, the crowd's voices still hissed like snakes. Savage took her. She's his now. Better off dead than in his camp. Each word pricked like a thorn, but she noticed he never flinched. The Apache warrior walked forward, as though their voices carried no weight, his broad shoulders cutting a path through disdain. She followed because she had no other choice yet, deep inside, because a part of her wanted to. When the settlement's buildings gave way to the open prairie, the silence between them grew heavy. She dared not look up, dared not ask the question. Pressing on her tongue, why me? Finally, she found her voice, brittle as glass. You know what they said, that I cannot give children. The words nearly stuck in her throat, thick with shame. She expected him to confirm it, perhaps to say he knew, that it did not matter, that he only needed labor for his lodge. But he said nothing. Instead, he glanced at her with eyes that revealed nothing and continued walking, his hand still around hers. That silence unnerved her more than ridicule. She had been mocked so many times she knew the rhythm of it, the sting of it. But silence, calm, steady, deliberate, was something else. She pulled her hand free, unable to stand it any longer. Why? Why did you pay for me? The others laughed. They know what I cannot give. You must know it too. So why? He stopped then. For a moment, she thought he would finally speak. But instead, he turned slightly, gesturing with a tilt of his chin toward the horizon. There, in the distance, she saw it. A small figure waiting near the edge of a grove. A child, her breath caught. At first, she thought her eyes deceived her. The tiny figure swayed on chubby legs, dark braids bouncing against small shoulders. As they drew closer, she heard it, a high, sweet laugh carried on the wind, the sound of a child unafraid, calling out with joy. Papa! The little girl toddled forward, stumbling a little before righting herself. The Apache warrior bent low, catching her in his arms with practiced ease. His stoic face softened, a rare warmth brushing across his features. He lifted the child high, then settled her against his chest. The baby girl, perhaps no more than a year old, clung to him, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. The widow froze. He had a child. The truth struck her with force. He had not bought her for her womb. He already had what others thought she could never provide, a living, breathing daughter. The child was proof of life, proof of love once had, proof of a family that had not vanished. And yet, where was the mother? The widow's eyes darted around the prairie, searching for a woman who might appear, who might call for her child with an open smile. But no one came. There was only the warrior, the little girl, and herself. He shifted, his gaze meeting hers again. This time, he did not look through her but into her, as though daring her to see what words had not yet revealed. Slowly, he extended his free hand, not in command, but in invitation. The baby reached toward her, tiny fingers curling open and shut. Her stomach tightened. She shook her head, stepping back. No, I cannot. But the baby laughed again, gurgling happily, and leaned toward her. The Apache's hand remained steady, patient, waiting for her choice. Her chest burned. She had been sold for her empty womb, branded worthless for failing to give life. Yet here, before her, was life itself, a child reaching out, not caring for what she had failed to do, only caring for the arms that might hold her. With trembling hands, the widow reached forward. The little girl tumbled into her embrace, light and warm, her small hands clutching at the widow's dress. The child's cheek pressed against her chest, her breathing quick and sweet. The widow gasped, the weight of the tiny body flooding her with sensations she thought she'd never know: softness, warmth, the pulse of a small heart beating near her own. Her arms closed around the baby almost instinctively, cradling her close. A sob rose in her throat, sudden and fierce, though no tears fell. The Apache watched quietly, saying nothing. For the first time since her husband's death, since the cruel betrayal of his family, since the jeers of the market, the widow felt something rise within her, something not broken, not shameful. A fragile seed of belonging. She looked at the child, at the warrior, then back at the child again. The baby giggled, tiny fingers tugging at her hair, eyes wide and trusting. The widow's lips trembled, parting with a whisper she could barely hear herself speak. Why me? The Apache finally spoke, his voice low, steady, the first words she had heard from him since he placed coins into the trader's palm. Because she needs you. The journey to his lodge stretched long across the prairie, a sea of grass rolling beneath the vast blue sky. The widow walked beside the Apache, the little girl nestled in her arms, her tiny head bobbing against her shoulder with each step. At first, she carried the child stiffly, uncertain if she held her correctly, afraid she might stumble and drop her. But the baby seemed to know no fear. She clung with surprising strength, her small fingers tangled in the widow's hair, her giggles bubbling up every time the wind brushed against her face. Each sound stirred something deep inside the widow's chest, something she had not felt in years. The ache of tenderness. The Apache walked in silence, his stride steady and sure, the prairie his familiar domain. From time to time, he glanced back at her as if to ensure she had not fallen behind. But he said nothing more. Hours later, the land changed. Trees gathered into clusters, the whisper of a creek broke the silence, and smoke rose faintly in the distance. Nestled against the bend of the water stood his home, a lodge made of sturdy timber and hide, surrounded by signs of a life carefully tended. A small corral, a stack of firewood, herbs hanging to dry beneath a sheltering overhang. The widow's heart pounded. This was no stranger's camp hastily erected. This was a dwelling, a place of permanence, a place where he had lived with his family, where another woman's hands had once worked, where another woman's laughter might have filled the air. Her throat tightened. Was she stepping into a shadow that still lingered here? The Apache led her inside. The lodge was warm, filled with the scent of cedar and smoke. Light filtered through small openings above, softening the space. The widow's eyes swept over the interior, a hearth carefully arranged, woven blankets folded neatly, baskets of food stores stacked along the walls. It was not empty. It was not lonely. It was lived in, and yet traces of absence lingered. A woman's presence could be felt in the details, the stitching on the blankets, the careful order of the shelves, the faint fragrance of herbs once gathered by gentle hands. The widow realized with a sudden pang that she was stepping into the space left behind by the child's mother. The Apache set down a bundle of firewood, then motioned for her to sit. She lowered herself onto a blanket, the baby still clinging to her. The little girl squirmed, then laughed, reaching for a small carved toy left on the floor. She babbled happily, pressing it to the widow's chest as if offering a gift. Her heart broke and healed all at once. The child's eyes, so full of trust, so unguarded, made her chest ache. She had been called barren, empty, useless. Yet here was a little girl who saw none of that. To her, the widow was not broken. She was simply someone to love. The Apache moved quietly, stoking the fire until flames danced in the hearth. The warmth filled the space, chasing away the chill of the prairie wind that clung to her skin. He returned with a bowl of stew, setting it before her without a word. She hesitated, unsure if it was truly for her. This is mine?" she asked softly. His gaze met hers, steady and calm. He gave a single nod that the widow's throat tightened. No one had served her in so long, not since before her husband's death, before the cold cruelty of his family. She had been given scraps, blamed for every shortfall, treated as if her very breath was theft. But here, without scorn, a man placed food in front of her as if she belonged at his fire. Her hands shook as she lifted the bowl. The stew was simple, flavored with herbs and game, but it tasted richer than any feast she had known. The baby crawled into her lap, tugging at the edge of the bowl, eager for a bite. She laughed softly, a sound that startled even her, as she fed the child small spoonfuls. The Apache watched them quietly, his expression unreadable. But she felt it, the weight of his gaze, not judging, not mocking, simply watching. When the meal was done, she laid the child down on a small woven mat, tucking a blanket around her. The baby curled close, thumb in her mouth, eyelids fluttering shut. The room fell into silence, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft breath of the sleeping child. The widow sat back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She finally dared to ask the question that had haunted her since the market. "Why me?" The Apache's dark eyes flickered in the firelight. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his voice, low and steady, filled the quiet. "You were cast out," he said simply. "So was I long ago." Her breath caught. He did not explain further, not yet. But in those few words she heard the echo of pain, of exile, of being stripped of worth in the eyes of others. And suddenly, she understood. He had not chosen her for her womb, nor for her labor. He had chosen her because he recognized the wound she carried, a wound he knew too well. The widow's eyes dropped to the child. Sleeping soundly, her tiny hand curled around the carved toy. A lump rose in her throat. The word mama was not yet spoken, but already it lingered in the air between them, a possibility, a seed waiting to bloom. The first nights in the Apache's home were the hardest. Widow lay awake on the woven mat the warrior had prepared for her, the fire flickering low in the hearth. The steady crackle of wood and the soft rustle of the wind outside should have soothed her, yet her mind churned restlessly. She had not chosen this life. She had been chosen for it. That thought gnawed at her, She turned her head, watching the child who slept just a few feet away. The little girl's chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm. Her tiny fist curled against her cheek. Her lips parted slightly as she dreamed. The innocence of that sleep pierced the widow's heart in ways she could not explain by day. She kept her hands busy sweeping the floor, helping grind corn, fetching water from the creek. The Apache did not demand it of her. He never spoke commands. But she felt compelled, if only to repay the food she ate, the shelter she was given. And as she worked, the baby followed Dot. At first, she stayed at a distance, watching with wide, curious eyes. But soon her courage grew. She crawled clumsily after the widow, tugged at her dress, and babbled in a language of sweet nonsense. The widow would pause, unsure what to do, then slowly bend to lift the child. The first time she did, the baby laughed aloud, a sound so pure it nearly undid her. It became a rhythm. Each morning the baby would reach out, arms wide, insisting on being held. And though her arms ached from tasks, the widow found herself unable to resist. One evening, after a day of gathering herbs, the widow sat on the ground, the baby in her lap. She hummed softly a tune her mother once sang to her long ago, when she thought she had forgotten. The baby clapped her hands to the rhythm, her small eyes shining with delight. Then it happened. The child, eyes fixed on the widow, opened her mouth and said it clear as a bell, sweet as dawn, "Mama." The widow froze. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The fire seemed to hush, the wind seemed to hold its breath. She stared at the baby, her heart thundering so loudly she feared it might shake the lodge walls. "Mama," the baby said again, this time with a giggle, as though the word were a game, a treasure she had discovered. Her tiny hands tugged at the widow's dress, seeking her attention. The widow's eyes filled with tears so fast she could not stop them. She had not wept at her husband's grave, nor when his family cast her out, nor when strangers mocked her barrenness. She had swallowed every ache, locked every sob deep inside. But this single word, this small voice calling her by a name she thought she would never hear, it broke her. She clutched the child against her chest, pressing her cheek to the baby's soft hair. Sobs shook her body, raw and unrestrained, yet they were not only of sorrow. They were of release, of healing, of something new blooming where she thought only ashes remained. The Apache stood at the far side of the lodge, mending a leather strap. He paused, his hands stilling, his dark eyes lifting to watch them. His face did not break into a smile, not openly. But in the firelight she saw it a quiet softness, a glimmer of satisfaction, as though the word had been meant not only for her, but for him as well. The widow pressed her lips to the baby's hair, whispering hoarsely through tears, "No, little one, I am not your mama." But the child only laughed and said it again, as if she knew better, "Mama." The widow shook her head, torn between the joy swelling inside her and the guilt that shadowed it. Somewhere this child had a mother, a woman who had carried her, birthed her, perhaps died giving her life. What right did the widow have to claim that sacred title? Later that night, when the baby finally slept in her little bed of blankets, the widow sat by the fire, her hands trembling in her lap. She could not look at the Apache. The word echoed in her mind, circling endlessly, "Mama, Mama." "Mama." At last, she whispered into the silence, her voice cracking. "She called me." Her mother. The Apache did not answer at once. He set aside the strap, his gaze steady on the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "She chose you." The words sent another shiver through her. She had been sold because she could not bear a child, branded useless for her empty womb. And yet here was a child who had chosen her, who had given her the very title she thought forever denied, "Mama." The widow pressed her trembling hands to her face, torn between disbelief and gratitude so fierce it hurt. For the first time in years, she did not feel barren. She did not feel empty. She felt full overflowing with a love she had not known she could give. And though she tried to deny it, deep within her heart, a seed had been planted. A seed that whispered maybe, just maybe, this child's word was not a mistake. Maybe it was a promise. The widow's life began to settle into a rhythm she had never imagined for herself. Days passed in a blur of simple but meaningful tasks: feeding the baby, washing small garments by the stream, gathering herbs, and mending clothes while the Apache father worked with his hands or hunted to provide for them. Each evening, when he returned, his little girl would light up with joy, squealing and stretching out her arms to him. The widow would watch quietly from the side, a tender ache in her chest as she witnessed a love between father and child so strong, so pure. It was a kind of bond she had once thought she would never be near again, let alone share. The baby's trust grew swiftly, binding the widow to her with invisible threads. The first time the child cried in the night, reaching for her instead of her father, she was caught between disbelief and awe. She gathered the little girl against her chest, humming softly, her voice shaky but full of love she did not know she still carried. The child quieted almost instantly, her small body relaxing as if she had been meant to rest there all along. That night, the widow did not sleep, lying awake with the baby curled against her heart, wondering how something so broken inside her could still hold such comfort for another. More time she spent with the child, the less she thought of her barrenness. It seemed almost laughable, the cruel weight she had carried for years, branded as unworthy because she could not conceive. For what did conception matter now, when this little girl clung to her every step, when her giggles brightened the home, when her first call in the morning was not Papa, but Mama? That word had been a knife the first time cutting through years of shame and loss, but now it was a balm. A healing salve poured over the wounds of her spirit. The Apache warrior said little, but she felt his presence in every glance. He would sometimes linger by the doorway, silent as ever, as she played with the child. His dark eyes softened when he watched her laugh or when the baby tugged at her braid. Though he rarely spoke, his silence no longer frightened her. Instead, it wrapped around her like a steady shield, a promise that he saw her not as the world had judged her, but as she truly was. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with crimson streaks, she sat outside with the child in her lap. The little girl's chubby hands patted her cheeks as though trying to memorize her face. The widow felt tears sting her eyes. She kissed the baby's hands, whispering a prayer she didn't fully know how to shape. "Thank you," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if it was to the child, to the Apache father, or to God himself for giving her a second chance at life. For weeks, her heart had been awakening, slowly and painfully, like a limb long numbed returning to sensation. The ache was there, yes, but with it came warmth, color, and a kind of joy she had once believed was lost to other women who could carry life in their wombs. Yet here she was, carrying life in her arms, in her laughter, in her very soul. Perhaps her purpose had never been to give birth. Perhaps her purpose had been to love. The Apache seemed to sense this quiet transformation. Though his words were few, he would bring her small tokens, a carved wooden comb, a basket woven with care, herbs to ease her weariness. These were not grand gestures, but to her they were treasures, signs that he respected her role in their home. And each time the child called her Mama, he never corrected her, never pulled the girl away. Instead, his lips would twitch into the faintest smile, as though he agreed with the child's innocent claim. One night, as the fire crackled low, she found herself whispering aloud into the shadows, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. "Maybe I am not barren after all. Not in the ways that matter." The baby slept soundly in her arms, her tiny breath steady against the widow's neck. And though the Apache gave no reply, he placed more wood onto the fire, the light flaring bright again as if to say her words were true, and that he believed in them as much as she was beginning to. It was in these small, quiet days that the widow's barren heart bloomed again, not with the pride of bearing children, but with the gift of nurturing, of belonging, of being called to a purpose greater than herself. And though the scars of her past would never fully fade, she realized she no longer needed them to. For the little girl's laughter, the Apache's silent strength, and the warmth of their shared home had written over them a new story, one not of shame, but of love. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled low in the hearth, shadows dancing across the walls of the Apache's lodge. The widow sat cross-legged on a woven mat, the child nestled against her chest, already drifting into dreams. Her small hands clutched the fabric of the widow's dress as though she feared letting go, even in sleep. The widow stroked the child's hair gently, her heart full yet uncertain. For weeks she had lived in this unexpected peace, yet she still did not understand why she had been chosen, why this man, who could have taken a woman strong and fertile, had taken her, branded worthless by her own people. The Apache father sat across the fire, silent as ever, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His dark eyes were steady, but tonight there was something different in the air, a heaviness, a tension that made her breath catch. Finally, he set the knife aside. His gaze lifted, and for a moment he simply watched her with the child as if memorizing the sight. Then, in a low, measured voice, he began to speak. "My woman." He paused, searching for the right words in English. His voice was deep, roughened by years of silence, but steady with truth. "She gave me life. She gave me this daughter." His hand moved toward the little girl, his eyes softening as they rested on her. "But the birth, it took her. Too much blood, too much pain. She left us." The widow froze, her heart twisting. She had wondered about the child's mother, but had never dared to ask. Now, the truth settled heavy in the space between them. "I buried her," he continued, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Alone, with only this little one crying against my chest. I hunted, I fought, I tried to care for her. But a warrior's hands." He looked down at his scarred palms. "They are not a mother's." The widow felt tears prick her eyes, her throat tightening. She thought of the nights she had been called barren, cursed, useless. And here sat a man who had lost what she had never been allowed to be. "I came to the market," he said slowly, "not for a wife, not for a servant, for a mother. My daughter needed arms, soft, warm, strong. She needed a voice to sing to her, hands to guide her." His eyes lifted to meet hers then, sharp and piercing. "I saw you. They called you empty. But I did not see emptiness." The widow's lips parted, but no sound came. He leaned forward, his gaze steady and unflinching. "I saw pain, yes. But I also saw fire. A heart still alive, even when they tried to kill it with words." He motioned toward the child sleeping against her. "She chose you before I could. She reached for you. And I knew the Creator had given her what she needed." The widow's vision blurred with tears. She held the little girl tighter, her heart breaking open in a way it never had before. All those years of being told she was less, that she was cursed, worthless, unwanted, this man's words cut through them like sunlight piercing storm clouds. "I am not ashamed," he finished, his voice firm. "I did not buy you because you are barren. I chose you because my daughter needs you. And because—" He hesitated, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Because I need you too." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, the child breathed softly, and the widow sat trembling. No one had ever said those words to her, not even her late husband. She had been wanted for her dowry, for her body, for what her womb might produce. But never for herself. Her lips trembled as she finally whispered, "You saw worth in me." When no one else did, the Apache gave a slow nod, his expression solemn, almost reverent. A woman is not just her womb. She is her spirit, her strength, her love. His hand lifted slightly, as though he wanted to reach across the fire, but he stopped midway, letting the moment rest. The widow bowed her head, tears falling freely now, dripping onto the child's soft hair. Her heart had never felt so raw, so vulnerable, and yet, for the first time, she was not afraid of its bareness. She was not empty. She was full of love, of belonging, of purpose. When she looked up again, the Apache's eyes were still on her, steady and unyielding. But now she saw not just a warrior, not just a father, but a man who had laid his soul bare before her. A man who had chosen her, not out of pity, but out of hope. She reached her free hand across the fire, hesitantly at first, then with certainty. His calloused hand met hers, warm and strong, sealing a bond that words alone could not hold. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by shadows and firelight, the widow understood. She had not been bought, she had been found. Morning light spilled softly through the cracks of the lodge, warming the packed earth floor and chasing away the night's chill. The widow stirred slowly, still half asleep, the child nestled against her chest. The little girl's breath rose and fell in steady rhythm, her tiny fist clutching the fabric of her dress even in slumber. For the widow, waking now was no longer a burden. The first sound she longed to hear was not her own sighs of despair, but the baby's small laughter when she finally opened her eyes. It struck her each morning as something close to a miracle. This child, not of her womb, yet wholly hers in every way that mattered. Every giggle, every cry, every step the little girl took toward her reminded her that life had given her a second chance, one far greater than she had ever dared to hope for. The Apache warrior was already outside when she rose. She stepped into the morning air with the child balanced on her hip. The sun painted the world gold, casting long shadows of him as he worked, splitting wood with precise, steady movements. When he noticed her, his gaze softened. He said nothing, he rarely did, but the silence between them had changed. It no longer felt like distance. It was an understanding, a quiet bond formed in the spaces where words would have been too small. The little girl squirmed in her arms, squealing when she spotted her father. "Papa!" she cried, reaching for him with impatient hands. The Apache set aside his axe, crossing the yard in long strides. But when he reached them, the child did not leap for him immediately. Instead, she buried her face against the widow's neck, clinging tightly. The warrior's eyes flickered with surprise, then something softer gratitude, perhaps even reverence. He brushed the baby's hair gently, then looked to the widow. "She has chosen," he murmured. The widow's throat tightened. The child's small voice, muffled against her shoulder, whispered, "Mama." It was not the first time she had spoken it, but every time felt like the first and unbreakable vow spoken by lips too small to understand its weight. Widow pressed her lips to the baby's hair, tears burning her eyes. She had once been called empty, but in this moment she felt fuller than she had ever thought possible. Her heart had become a cradle, and this little girl, with her tiny hands and bright laughter, had filled it completely. That evening, after the day's work was done, the Apache warrior built a larger fire than usual. He sat across from her, the flames throwing light against his strong features. His daughter crawled between them, content, babbling nonsense words as she played with pebbles and sticks. At last, he spoke. "You are not my wife by blood law. You are not bound by chains." His dark eyes searched hers, steady and unwavering. "But my daughter calls you mother. And my heart—" He hesitated, as though unused to the vulnerability of confession. "My heart calls you woman. Mine." The widow's breath caught. She had been bartered before, passed between men like property, spoken for without being asked. But this was different. He was not claiming her as possession. He was offering her a choice. She looked down at the little girl, who had crawled into her lap, pressing her head against her as though she belonged there. Then she raised her eyes to the warrior. "I have no dowry, no bloodline to give you. My womb may never bear you another child." He leaned forward, his voice firm, almost fierce. "You have given what no other woman could give. You gave my daughter a mother. You gave me back my home. That is greater than gold, greater than blood." Her tears fell freely now, and for the first time she did not hide them. She reached across the space between them, her hand trembling until it found his. His fingers closed around hers, calloused, strong, but tender. In that grip she felt safety, belonging, and the promise of a future that was hers to claim. That night, as the child fell asleep in her arms, the widow whispered into her soft curls, "I will never leave you. You are mine, and I am yours." The little girl stirred, half asleep, and murmured, "Mama," her voice a breath of heaven in the stillness. The Apache father leaned close, pressing his forehead gently to the widow's. "We are family now," he said, and so it was. No longer a widow, no longer barren, no longer worthless in the eyes of others, she was a mother, a partner, a woman whose love had been seen and chosen. The fire burned low, casting its last glow over the three of them, huddled close. And for the first time in her life, the widow knew the meaning of fullness, not of womb, but of heart, of home, of family.